The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood stood frozen, the air thick with the weight of Elias Morrow's challenge. His words, "You're standing on my proof," echoed off the marble, silencing the last traces of laughter. The teller's hands hovered over their counters. Sophie's nervous giggle long gone, Mia's pen still, Mr. Grayson's glasses slipping further down his nose. Paul Travers, the branch manager, gripped his pen tightly, his polished facade cracking under Elias's unflinching gaze. Carl Hayes, the security guard, shifted his weight, his hand still near his radio, but his confidence wavering. The customers, locals who'd come for routine transactions, clutched their bags, their whispers swallowed by the tension. Elias's burlap sack, its edges frayed and stained, lay open at his feet, a silent promise that the world they knew was about to shift. Elias bent slowly, his gnarled fingers pulling the sack wider, and the room held its breath. From its depths spilled bundles of faded banknotes, thick stacks tied with brittle paper bands, each stamped with First Union's original logo, a crest unused since the 1950s, known only from dusty archives. The notes hit the marble with a soft thud, their edges curled with age, their ink dulled but unmistakable. A cracked leather ledger followed, its cover embossed with faint gold lettering, its pages yellowed but intact. A hush fell over the lobby, the chandelier's light catching the notes' faded green, turning the scene surreal, like a museum exhibit come to life. Paul's mouth opened, his voice catching. "What? What is this?" he managed, stepping forward, his tie suddenly too tight. Elias straightened, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes burning with quiet triumph. "Proof," he said simply, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. "Proof I built this bank. Proof it was mine before your time, before your father's time." Carl frowned, his hand dropping from his radio, his eyes locked on the notes. Even he, no banker, could see their authenticity, the weight of history in their worn fibers. Sophie, her bravado gone, leaned over the counter, her voice a whisper. Those look real." Mia nodded, her eyes wide, her earlier smirk a distant memory. Mr. Grayson, the veteran teller, stepped forward, his glasses now in hand as he squinted at the ledger. "That logo," he muttered, "it's from the bank's first years. I've seen it in old records." The customers murmured, a farmer in overalls leaning closer, a librarian gasping softly. The room's skepticism began to fracture, replaced by a dawning awe. Paul crouched, his polished shoes scuffing the marble as he lifted the ledger with trembling hands. He flipped through its brittle pages, his eyes scanning dates, figures, signatures. His fingers stopped, his face paling as he read a name scrawled in bold ink, Elias Morrow. This says you were the founder," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked up, meeting Elias's steady gaze. "Elias Morrow, that's you?" Elias nodded, his cap casting a shadow that seemed to grow larger. "That's me." A woman near the counter gasped, her purse slipping to the floor. A man by the door muttered, "Morrow. The first owner?" The name wasn't unknown. Buried in Crestwood's lore, Elias Morrow was a figure from the bank's origin, a man thought lost to time, presumed dead decades ago. Paul shook his head, his mind racing. "That's impossible. Elias Morrow would be over 90 by now." Elias's eyes glinted, his voice steady. "And yet, here I stand." The lobby fell silent, the only sound the faint rustle of Paul's fingers on the ledger's pages. His face grew paler with each line, each date, each signature that matched the framed certificates on the wall behind him. Certificates that bore the bank's founding seal. Elias Morrow was no myth, no drifter. He was real, and his proof was undeniable. The crowd's earlier amusement dissolved into a heavy stillness, their eyes shifting from the scattered banknotes to the old man who'd carried them. The chandelier's light seemed to dim, the bank's polished grandeur now a hollow shell built on a truth they'd never questioned. Elias stood tall, his tattered coat a badge of endurance, his sack a vault of history that had just cracked open their world. The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood was a crucible of silence, the weight of Elias Morrow's proof. Faded banknotes and a cracked ledger, sinking into the marble like a verdict. The scattered notes, stamped with a logo from the bank's forgotten infancy, lay in heaps. their presence a silent accusation. The leather ledger, open in Paul Travers' trembling hands, bore Elias's name in ink that hadn't faded, a testament to a truth long buried. The tellers, Sophie, Mia, Mr. Grayson, stood frozen behind their counters, their earlier smirks replaced by wide-eyed shock. Carl Hayes, the security guard, let his hand fall from his radio, his broad frame softened by uncertainty. The customers, locals who'd known the bank as Crestwood's bedrock, murmured softly, their disbelief giving way to a creeping empathy. Elias Morrow, the ragged man they'd laughed at, was no wanderer. He was a ghost of the bank's founding, returned to reclaim his stolen legacy. Paul's voice broke the stillness, hoarse and unsteady. This ledger, it's from 1952. It says you started this bank. He looked up, his navy tie askew, his eyes searching Elias's weathered face for some crack in the story. How is this possible? Elias's gaze didn't waver, his tattered coat seeming to carry the weight of decades. Possible, he said, his voice low, resonant, like a bell tolling through fog. I poured my life into this place, every brick, every counter, built with my sweat, until they took it from me. The crowd leaned in, the air heavy with anticipation. Sophie clutched the counter, her knuckles white. Mia's pen rolled to the floor unnoticed. Mr. Grayson, the veteran teller muttered, took it? As if the words unlocked a memory from the bank's whispered lore. Elias's eyes swept the room, lingering on the chandelier, the brass plaques, the gleaming marble, monuments to a dream he'd shaped. I founded First Union in '52, he began, his voice steady but laced with a raw edge. Me and my partner, Henry Caldwell. We were young, scrappy, with nothing but a vision and a loan from a farmer who believed in us. We built this bank to serve Crestwood, farmers, shopkeepers, families. It was ours until Henry's greed turned him against me. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a woman in the back whispering, Caldwell, that name's on the plaques. Elias nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. Henry was my friend, my brother in all but blood. But money changes a man. By '58, he wanted it all. He forged papers, convinced the board I was unfit. Too reckless, he said. One day I walked in, and my name was gone. Erased. The board voted me out, and Henry took the reins. I fought for years, letters, lawyers, pleas. But doors slammed in my face. Crestwood turned its back, and I became a ghost. Paul's hands tightened on the ledger, his face pale as he scanned the signatures, the dates, the meticulous records of First Union's infancy. You disappeared, he said almost to himself. Elias's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They wanted me gone, so I went. Drifted, worked odd jobs, carried this sack with the truth inside. But I never forgot. This bank was my life, and they built their empire on my bones. The lobby's silence was deafening, the chandelier's light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward Elias. Carl shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado gone, his eyes flicking to the notes scattered like fallen leaves. Sophie's voice trembled as she spoke, barely audible. You fought all those years. Elias nodded, his gnarled hands clenching. Every day. And now I'm back, because truth doesn't die. No matter how deep you bury it. Mr. Grayson stepped closer, his glasses back on, his voice soft but firm. I remember stories. Old-timers saying the bank's start wasn't clean, but no one believed them. The customers murmured louder now, a farmer nodding slowly, a librarian clutching her check with new respect. The bank's polished facade, its plaques, its certificates, felt hollow, a monument to a lie. Paul swallowed hard, the ledger heavy in his hands. And now, he asked, his voice shaking, what do you want? Elias's gaze was steel, his words a vow. What's mine? This bank, its name, its heart, it belongs to me. The room chilled, the weight of his words sinking into every soul. The tellers exchanged glances, their amusement replaced by a dawning reverence. Carl's hand rested at his side, his role as enforcer forgotten. The customers, once detached, now stood as witnesses to a reckoning. Elias Morrow had returned, not just to claim a building, but to unearth a truth that would shake Crestwood's foundations. The ledger's pages fluttered in Paul's hands, a fragile bridge to a past that demanded to be heard. The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood was a battlefield of whispers, Elias Morrow's revelation, banknotes from the 1950s, a ledger naming him as founder, igniting a fire that no one could extinguish. The scattered notes lay like relics on the marble, their faded ink a silent scream against the bank's polished history. Paul Travers, the branch manager, clutched the leather ledger, his fingers tracing the signatures as if they might vanish under scrutiny. His navy suit, once a symbol of control, seemed to weigh him down, his tie a noose tightening with each passing second. The tellers, Sophie, Mia, Mr. Grayson, stood rooted behind their counters, their faces a mix of awe and dread. Carl Hayes, the security guard, hovered near Elias, his earlier bravado replaced by a wary respect, his hand no longer near his radio. The customers, Crestwood locals, caught in a moment larger than their small town, murmured louder, their voices weaving a tapestry of shock and curiosity. Elias Morrow, the ragged man they'd dismissed, was no ghost. He was a force, his truth reshaping the bank's very foundation. Paul's voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes still on the ledger. "You're saying this bank was stolen from you?" His question hung heavy, a plea for some flaw in Elias's story to restore order. Elias's weathered face hardened, his eyes glinting like steel under his frayed cap. "Stolen," he repeated, his voice a low growl that carried the pain of decades. "Henry Caldwell didn't just take my share. He took my name, my life. These walls are mine, built on my dreams, and I've got more to show you." The crowd leaned in, the air electric with anticipation. Sophie's hands gripped the counter, her earlier giggles a distant memory. Mia's eyes darted to the sack, her breath shallow. Mr. Grayson, his glasses fogged, muttered, "More," as if the ledger alone wasn't enough to upend their world. Elias bent to the sack again, his movements deliberate, his gnarled fingers pulling out a stack of yellowed papers. Legal documents, their edges brittle, stamped with seals and signatures that gleamed with faded authority. He held them out to Paul, his voice steady. "Read these. They'll tell you what Henry didn't want anyone to know." Paul hesitated, his hands shaking as he took the papers, their weight more than mere paper could account for. His eyes scanned the text, deeds, contracts, notarized statements from 1958, each one bearing Elias Morrow's name as co-founder, each one declaring his ownership never relinquished. His face paled further, his voice barely a whisper. They say you never sold your stake, that the transfer to Caldwell was fraudulent." He looked up, his gaze meeting Elias's, and for the first time fear flickered in his eyes. "If these are real, they're real," Elias cut in, his voice ablade. "I spent years tracking them down, piece by piece, from clerks who remembered, from lawyers who wouldn't bend to Henry's money. That's my signature, my bank, my truth." The lobby chilled, the documents a guillotine poised to sever the bank's carefully curated legacy. Carl shifted uncomfortably, his badge catching the chandelier's light, his role as enforcer now irrelevant. A customer, the farmer in overalls, stepped closer, his voice low. "Caldwell's name's on every plaque. You're saying it's all a lie?" Elias nodded, his lips curling into a faint, bitter smile. "A lie built on my back. Henry took everything, my work, my future. But he couldn't take these." He gestured to the papers, the notes, the ledger, a vault of evidence that had survived decades of erasure. Sophie's voice broke the silence, soft and trembling. "What does this mean? For the bank?" Paul's hands trembled, the documents rustling, as he turned another page, finding a notarized affidavit from a long-dead board member confessing to the fraud. "It means," he started, then stopped, his throat tight. "It means the bank's history, our history, is wrong." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a librarian clutching her check whispering, "He's the real owner?" Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, his voice firm now. "I've seen those seals before, in old records. They're not fakes." The weight of Elias's evidence pressed down on the lobby, the brass plaques and framed certificates on the walls now hollow, their grandeur tainted by betrayal. Carl's shoulders slumped, his earlier threat to escort Elias out forgotten. A woman in the back, her purse clutched tight, spoke up. "What happens now? If he's right, who owns this place?" Paul looked at Elias, his face a mask of conflict, loyalty to the bank's current owners warring with the undeniable truth in his hands. "We'd need to verify these," he said, his voice unsteady. "Call the board. The lawyers." Elias's gaze didn't flinch, his presence a storm-gathering strength. "Verify all you want," he said. "The truth don't bend. I'm here to take back what's mine. Not just for me, but for every soul Henry's greed crushed." His words landed like a vow, resonating with the crowd, their earlier skepticism now a distant echo. The documents in Paul's hands were more than paper. They were a key to a locked past, and Elias Morrow was turning it, forcing Crestwood to face a reckoning it had never expected. The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood was a crucible of truth, the air heavy with the weight of Elias Morrow's evidence. Faded banknotes, a ledger, and now legal documents that branded the bank's history a fraud. The yellowed papers in Paul Trevor's hands trembled, their notarized seals and signatures a silent indictment of Henry Caldwell's betrayal. The marble floor, once a symbol of unshakable stability, seemed to shift beneath the feet of the tellers. Sophie, Mia, Mr. Grayson, who stood motionless, their faces etched with shock and a growing reverence. Carl Hayes, the security guard, leaned against a counter, his badge dull under the chandelier's light. His earlier threats to escort Elias out now a distant misstep. The customers, Crestwood locals, caught in a moment that transcended their small town, whispered in clusters, their voices a chorus of awe and unease. Elias Morrow, the ragged man they'd mocked, stood tall, his tattered coat a mantle of resilience, his eyes burning with the fire of a man who'd carried a truth through decades of exile. Paul's voice, when it came, was a fragile thread. "If these documents are real," he trailed off, his eyes flicking to the framed certificates on the wall. Their proud display of Caldwell's name, now a lie exposed. "They're real," Elias said, his voice steady, a hammer striking stone. "And they mean this bank. Every brick, every dollar, was built on my blood. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to set things right." His words landed like a gavel, the lobby's polished grandeur dimming under the weight of his claim. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a farmer in overalls nodding slowly, a librarian whispering, "He's telling the truth." The bank's legacy, its plaques and brass, felt like a hollow shell, its history rewritten in the span of minutes. Sophie, her hand still gripping the counter, spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "What happens now? If he owns the bank?" Her question hung in the air, a spark igniting the room's tension. Mia's eyes darted to Paul, her earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet fear. Mr. Grayson, the veteran teller, adjusted his glasses, his voice low but firm. "I've seen those seals in old files. They're no forgeries. This changes everything." Carl straightened, his arms uncrossing, his role as enforcer obsolete. A customer, an older woman with a worn purse, stepped forward, her voice soft but piercing. "You can't just ignore this. He's got proof." Paul's face was a mask of conflict, his loyalty to the bank's current owners, the Caldwell family who'd controlled First Union for generations, warring with the undeniable evidence in his hands. He turned a page in the documents, finding another affidavit, this one from a 1958 clerk who'd witnessed Caldwell's forgery. His throat tightened, his voice barely audible. This could mean the Caldwells never legally owned the bank. The words were a death knell, reverberating through the lobby, the crowd's whispers rising to a low roar. A man near the door muttered, "Stolen all this time?" The chandelier's light flickered, as if the bank itself were recoiling from the truth. Elias's gaze swept the room, his presence a storm held in check. "I fought for years," he said, his voice rising, each word a stone laid in a long overdue foundation. "Letters, lawyers, pleas, all ignored. They wanted me erased, but truth don't bend. This bank is mine, and I'm here for every soul they buried to keep it." his eyes locked with Paul's, a challenge and a plea woven together. The manager's hands shook, the documents rustling, his mind racing. Call the board? The lawyers. The Caldwells would fight, claim the papers were fakes, drag the matter through courts until Elias, nearing 90, had no years left to fight. But the truth was here, in black ink and yellowed paper, undeniable. A soft sound broke the tension. A customer, the farmer, stepping forward to pick up a faded banknote from the pile at Elias's feet. He held it reverently, placing it on the counter as if it were a sacred relic. Sophie, her eyes wide, followed, lifting another note and setting it beside the first. Mia hesitated, then joined, her hands trembling as she added to the growing pile. One by one, the tellers and customers moved, each placing a piece of Elias's proof on the counter, banknotes, pages from the ledger, scraps of his legacy. The act was quiet but seismic, a collective acknowledgement that the man they'd laughed at was no drifter, but the bank's true heart. Carl watched, his badge a forgotten weight, and gave Elias a small nod, his silence a concession. Paul's shoulders slumped, the document still in his hands, his voice a whisper. This isn't over. But his tone carried no fight, only the weight of a truth he couldn't unsee. Elias's lips curved into a faint smile, not of triumph, but of peace, as if the decades of carrying his burden had finally eased. It's begun, he said, his voice soft but resonant, a promise that echoed through the lobby's marble and brass. The crowd stood as witnesses, their earlier amusement now a memory, their actions a bridge to a past demanding justice. The bank's history built on Caldwell's betrayal was crumbling, and Elias Morrow, the man they dismissed, was its reckoning. The documents, the notes, the ledger, they were more than proof. They were a mirror, forcing Crestwood to see the cost of its silence. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the lobby's windows. But inside, a new light was dawning, one forged in the courage of a man who refused to be forgotten. The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood thrummed with a quiet reverence. The scattered banknotes and ledger pages on the counter transformed into a shrine of truth. Elias Morrow's evidence, faded notes from the 1950s, a cracked ledger, and legal documents exposing Henry Caldwell's betrayal had shattered the bank's polished facade. The marble floor, once a symbol of unshakable legacy, now bore the weight of a reckoning. Paul Travers, the branch manager, stood clutching the yellowed papers, his navy suit rumpled, his face a map of conflict. The tellers, Sophie, Mia, Mr. Grayson, gazed at the pile of notes they'd placed on the counter, their hands still trembling from the act. Carl Hayes, the security guard, leaned against a pillar, his badge dim, his earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet nod of respect. The customers, Crestwood locals who'd stumbled into history, stood in a loose circle, their whispers softened into a shared awe. Elias Morrow, the ragged man they'd mocked, was no longer a stranger. He was the bank's true founder, his presence a beacon that lit the room with justice. Paul's voice, when it broke the silence, was low, almost reverent. This changes everything. He set the documents down, his hands unsteady, as if releasing a burden too heavy to carry. His eyes flicked to the framed certificates on the wall, their proud display of Caldwell's name, now a mockery. The board needs to see this, the lawyers too. But his words lacked the certainty of a man in control. They were a concession, an acknowledgement that the bank's history was a lie built on Elias's stolen dreams. Sophie, her eyes glistening, whispered, "He's been fighting all this time." Mia nodded, her earlier giggles a ghost, her hands resting on a faded banknote as if it held a pulse. Elias stood tall, his tattered coat a testament to his endurance, his frayed cap casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the lobby. "I didn't come for pity," he said, his voice steady, resonant, like a bell tolling for truth. "I came for what's right, not just for me, but for every soul this bank forgot." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the chandelier, the brass plaques, the marble counters, all built on his vision, all tainted by betrayal. The crowd's murmurs stilled, their earlier amusement replaced by a collective weight, as if they, too, carried the cost of Crestwood's silence. A soft movement broke the moment. A customer, the librarian with the worn purse, stepped forward again. She picked up another banknote from the pile at Elias's feet, her fingers gentle, and placed it on the counter beside the others. "This belongs here," she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting Elias's with quiet respect. The farmer in overalls followed, lifting a page from the ledger and setting it down, his calloused hands careful, as if handling a sacred text. One by one, the tellers joined, Sophie and Mia adding more notes, Mr. Grayson placing a document with a notarized seal. The customers, too, moved forward, men and women who'd known the bank as Crestwood's heart, now rewriting its story with each careful act. The counter became a monument, a patchwork of Elias's legacy, each piece a brick in a foundation reclaimed. Carl, his role as enforcer long forgotten, stepped forward, his boots soft on the marble. He picked up a single banknote, its edges curled, and placed it on the pile, his nod to Elias a silent apology. "Didn't see you before," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "I see you now." The words landed like a vow, resonating with the crowd, who nodded in agreement, their actions a chorus of recognition. Elias watched, his weathered face softening, his eyes glinting with something new. Not triumph, but peace, as if the decades of carrying his truth had finally found a home. Paul straightened, his shoulders squaring as he faced Elias. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice steadier now, but not with defiance, with resolve. "The Caldwells will fight this. They'll call the papers fakes, drag it through courts." He paused, his gaze dropping to the counter's pile, then back to Elias. "But I'll make sure they see this. All of it." His words were a promise, a crack in the bank's old guard, a sign that Crestwood might finally face its past. The crowd murmured approval, a woman in the back whispering, "It's time." Elias's lips curved into a faint smile, his gnarled hands resting at his sides. "Do what you must," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "I've done my part." He turned toward the glass doors, his steps measured, his tattered coat swaying like a flag of victory. The sack, now lighter, hung over his shoulder, its contents no longer a burden, but a testament. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The lobby's silence roared with his legacy, the counter's pile a beacon that would outlast the Caldwell's lies. The customers and tellers watched him go, their hands still, their hearts heavy with the weight of a truth they'd helped unearth. As Elias stepped into the fading Crestwood sunlight, the bank behind him felt different, its marble less cold, its brass less proud. The crowd remained, their whispers now a plan, calls to the press, to historians, to anyone who'd listen. Paul picked up the documents, his fingers steady now, and headed for his office, the board's number already in his mind. The chandelier glowed softly, casting light on the counter's pile, a new chapter for First Union Bank taking shape. Elias Morrow had walked in as a joke, but he left as a legend, his truth a fire that would burn through Crestwood's history until justice was done. The First Union Bank lobby in Crestwood stood transformed, its marble and brass no longer symbols of untouchable legacy, but witnesses to a truth reborn. The counter, piled high with Elias Morrow's faded banknotes, ledger pages, and legal documents, was a monument to his reclaimed dream, a testament to a founder betrayed and forgotten, now seen in the light of justice. Paul Travers, the branch manager, held the yellowed papers, his navy suit creased, his face etched with a resolve that had replaced his earlier doubt. The tellers, Sophie, Mia, Mr. Grayson, stood behind the counter, their hands still, their eyes fixed on the pile they'd helped build, a quiet pride in their actions. Carl Hayes, the security guard, lingered near the door, his badge a quiet afterthought, his nod to Elias a mark of respect that lingered in the air. The customers, Crestwood's own, formed a loose circle, their whispers now a murmur of purpose, calls to action, to spread the word, to right a wrong decades old. Elias Morrow, the ragged man who'd walked in under laughter, had left as a legend, his tattered coat a banner of endurance, his truth a spark that had ignited the town. As the glass doors closed behind Elias, the lobby's silence gave way to a soft hum of movement. Paul stepped toward his office, the documents clutched tightly, his voice low but firm. "This bank was built on a lie," he said, more to himself than the crowd. "But it won't stay that way." He dialed the board, his fingers steady, knowing the Caldwells would fight, claim forgery, stall with lawyers, cling to their stolen empire. But the evidence was ironclad, and Crestwood's heart was shifting. Sophie, wiping her eyes, turned to Mia. "We're part of this now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mia nodded, placing another banknote on the pile, her hands reverent. Mr. Grayson, his glasses fogged, spoke up, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I've worked here 30 years. Never thought I'd see the day we'd face the truth." The customers, no longer bystanders, began to act. The farmer in overalls pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the counter's pile to share with the local paper. The librarian, her check forgotten, spoke to a neighbor about contacting a historian who'd studied Crestwood's past. A young man near the door, his flannel shirt rumpled, posted a video online, the faded banknotes and Elias's story already spreading beyond the town's borders. The lobby, once a place of routine, was now a crucible of change, its chandelier casting a warm glow on the counter's relics, each one a piece of Elias's heart restored. Outside, the Crestwood sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and ash. Elias Morrow walked slowly down the quiet street, his sack nearly empty, his steps lighter than they'd been in decades. He didn't need to hear the murmurs behind him, the plans taking shape, the truth rippling outward. He'd carried his burden alone for years, through dusty roads, through nights of doubt, and now Crestwood carried it with him. The bank's marble walls, its brass plaques, its very name, were no longer Caldwell's. They were his, reclaimed not by force, but by the quiet power of truth. The days that followed would bring battles, courtrooms, headlines, the Caldwells' desperate denials, but they would come too late. The counter's pile, preserved by Paul's orders, became a symbol, photographed, shared, studied. Historians confirmed the document's authenticity, and Crestwood's people rallied, their voices a chorus demanding justice. First Union Bank faced a new chapter, one where Elias Morrow's name would be carved anew, not on plaques but in the town's memory, a reminder that no truth, however buried, could stay hidden forever. Elias, now resting in a modest room at the edge of town, heard the news as it spread. Articles, petitions, a small plaque proposed in his honor. He smiled faintly, his gnarled hands folding the last banknote he'd kept, its edges worn but its crest still clear. He'd won, not just for himself, but for every soul erased by greed. Crestwood, once blind, now saw him, and that was enough. Have you ever felt a truth buried deep, waiting to be heard? Elias Morrow carried his for decades, a bank stolen, a name erased. Yet he walked into Crestwood's heart and made the world see. His story is for anyone who's been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced, a fire for those who fight to reclaim what's theirs. Hit like if you've ever stood up for what's right, even when the odds were against you. Share your story in the comments. When did you unearth a hidden truth? Subscribe for more tales of courage, justice, and the voices that refuse to fade. Together, let's shine a light on the stories waiting to be told.